All right, let's dive into a topic that, believe me, trips up even seasoned engineers: the huge difference between a Kubernetes sandbox and a namespace. So picture this: you're in that big technical interview, right? Things are going great. And then the hiring manager leans forward and says, "So, tell me, what's the difference between a sandbox and a namespace?" It's one of those classic questions, and it's really designed to see how deep your understanding goes.
Well, by the end of this explainer, you're not just going to know the answer. You're going to have a super clear, confident, production-ready explanation that's going to make you stand out. Let's get to it. To really nail this, we need a mental model. So think of your entire Kubernetes cluster as a massive apartment building. The whole building, that's your cluster. Each floor in that building, that's a logical namespace. And then the individual flats or apartments on each floor, those are your pod sandboxes. This simple analogy is going to be key. Okay, so let's start with the floors of our building: namespaces. At its core, a namespace is just a logical partition inside your cluster. It's like drawing virtual walls to group all your stuff together and keep it separate from other stuff. Simple as that. And this is how we actually use those partitions in the real world. You use namespaces to keep your dev, test, and prod environments from stepping on each other's toes. Or you give each team, the data team, the ML team, their very own workspace. This is also where you apply all your security rules like RBAC and set resource quotas so one team doesn't gobble up all the CPU. It's all about organization and governance at that high cluster level. Okay, so if namespaces are the floors, let's zoom way in, right into a single flat, the pod sandbox. Now, this is the most important part. The sandbox is not a Kubernetes thing. It's a container runtime thing. It's the isolated little world created by something like Containerd that sets the stage for every container running inside a pod. And here's what that little world provides. Every single pod gets its own sandbox, and that sandbox sets up a unique network with its very own IP address. That's why all the containers inside one pod can just talk to each other over localhost. The sandbox also handles that crucial OS-level isolation for things like process IDs and file systems. It's the secure, walled-off box where the containers actually get to live. And this is the secret sauce. You ever wonder how a service mesh like Istio or a simple sidecar logging container actually works its magic? Well, it's because your main app container and that sidecar container are running inside the exact same pod sandbox. They share that network, which lets the sidecar perfectly intercept all of your application's traffic. It's a brilliant design. So let's just put it all side by side to make it crystal clear. A namespace is for logical isolation. It's a Kubernetes concept. It's the floor in our building, used to organize teams. A sandbox, on the other hand, is for runtime isolation. It's a container runtime concept. It's the flat itself, the walls and the plumbing, used to secure a running process. One is for organization, the other is for execution. Okay, theory is great, but let's make this super concrete. We're going to walk through a real-world MLOps platform to see exactly how all these pieces fit together in a production system. All right, so you've got your production EKS cluster. First thing you do, you create namespaces to separate your environments: quant dev, quant staging, quant prod. Makes sense. Then, inside your quant prod namespace, you deploy your application pods. Let's say a model API, a feature store, and some monitoring. And the final piece of the puzzle? Each one of those pods gets its very own, totally unique, isolated sandbox created by the container runtime. You see that hierarchy? Cluster, down to namespace, down to pod, and finally, inside the pod is the sandbox. So why should you care about all this? Honestly, because getting this right is basically a superpower. It means you can design complex, multi-tenant platforms with total confidence. You'll use namespaces to keep everything clean and separated. But when some weird networking bug pops up, you'll know to look at the sandbox level. And most importantly, it's the key to truly mastering those advanced patterns like service meshes. So let's go back to that interview room for a second. The question comes, you can now lean back and confidently say this: a namespace is a logical isolation mechanism within Kubernetes that we use to organize resources. A sandbox, on the other hand, is the runtime isolation environment created for each pod by the container runtime, which provides that crucial network and OS-level isolation for its containers. Boom. It's clean, it's correct, and it shows you get the fundamental difference. And that's pretty much it. But I want to leave you with this one final thought. Now that you really truly get the different layers of isolation, from that big logical namespace all the way down to the tiny runtime sandbox, how is that going to change the way you design and debug your next system? Something to think about.